people find out that I was a freelance bass player for over 3 decades, they sometimes ask me what bass playing has to do with real estate. And the answer is everything. In music, the bass player holds down the groove, and while the guitarist or other instrumentalists are soloing, or while the singer is in the spotlight, the bass player is playing the note that makes everything above the bass make sense. Fundamentals, precision, the thing underneath that nobody notices until it's missing. And that's what I've spent over 35 years doing in real estate. And after training and coaching over 26,000 investors and agents, I'm going to tell you the fundamental most realtors are missing right now. Most realtors have no idea how investors think. And I can say that confidently because I've been on the other side of that table for 35 years. The problem is this: most agents treat investors exactly like they treat emotional home buyers. But investors aren't buying emotion, they're buying numbers, cash flow, ROI, risk, timing, financing, exit strategy. And serious investors can tell within 5 minutes or less whether a realtor truly understands investing or they just say they do. A home buyer walks into a property asking one question: can I see myself living here? An investor walks into the same property asking one question: will this property perform financially? Completely different psychology, completely different conversation. But most realtors never adjust their approach. They talk about staging, the light, the kitchen, the paint color, the neighborhood feel. And meanwhile, the investor's thinking cash flow, vacancy risk, tenant profile, financing structure, future appreciation, and exit strategy. The investor's nodding politely and mentally crossing you off their list. Here's where it gets even more interesting. And most realtors miss this completely. At any given time, only 6% of homeowners are actively in the market. 6%, that's the buyer or seller who raises their hand. The 6% who are looking to move. The 6% who are ready right now. And every realtor in the country is competing for that same 6%. All of your marketing and your prospecting for the same buyers, sellers, same leads, same shrinking pond. But what about the other 94%? They're not in the market. They don't care about your just listed or just sold postings, but they do care about retirement, their finances, and how they can move their financial needle in an increasingly expensive world to live in. But here's the reality. They own property. Many have equity. Equity that in most cases is sitting completely dormant. Dead equity. The untapped equity sitting there doing nothing for the homeowner. And here's the thing. Most of them would absolutely entertain a conversation about what that equity could do for them, how it could be leveraged, how it could generate income, how it could be the first step towards building real lasting wealth. But nobody's having that conversation with them because their realtor was never taught to have it. The agents who learn to have that conversation confidently as a trusted advisor and not just a salesperson are no longer competing in the 6% world. For over 3 decades of being an investor in both Canada and the US, watching agents who mean well but didn't really speak the language of investment, here's the typical pattern. I ask the agent if they work with investors. They say, yes, of course. I say, can we talk about my investment criteria? They say yes. I provide them my investment criteria, and they nod in affirmation. And now they say, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to send you some MLS listings, and if you see anything that you like, let's go see it. And when I receive these listings, I see that none of them pertain to any of the investment criteria that we had a conversation about. In fact, none of these properties typically make any sense. Or if I do say, hey, I like this one, they don't ask me why I chose that. No, they just say, let's go see it. This is the typical pattern that realtors have when working with investors and why they think investors are difficult to work with, because there's more back and forth, there's more numbers involved, and most realtors are looking for a quick transaction to just move on rather than creating a lifetime relationship with that client. There's moments that I realized this wasn't a one-off problem. It was a systematic gap that no one was fixing. And why I built the Real Estate Investment Specialist designation was out of frustration for 35 years of working with agents who did basically the same thing. And what changed for the agents who went through the training that I created, not just their income, their relationships with their clients, repeat business, referrals, the shift from transactional to advisory. And that makes all the difference. This is exactly why I built the Real Estate Investment Specialist designation. Not to teach agents how to sell more homes, to teach them how investors think, how they evaluate a property, how they make decisions, how they weigh risk, how they structure financing, what questions they're actually asking when they walk through the door. The language, the framework, the mindset, and then how to identify the 94%, how to start equity conversations, how to show up as an advisor instead of an order taker. Because once you understand that, you're not closing one deal with an investor, you're becoming their advisor for their first property, their second, their portfolio. And that's just not a transaction, that's a practice. The realtors who will dominate the next decade won't just understand how to sell homes, they'll understand how investors think. They'll know how to have the equity conversation with the 94% who aren't raising their hand, but absolutely would listen to an equity conversation. Because investors don't create one transaction, they create long-term business. And so does any homeowner who finally understands what their equity can do for them and has a realtor smart enough to show them. If that's the realtor that you want to be, the link below is in the description. The Real Estate Investment Specialist designation, built by an investor for agents who want to think like one.